would I want to share? So the easiest ones to go first, because then no one can steal yours. Linda.
I like that. I was thinking,
I had thought that.
Noah's Ark.
I thought that
So,
earlier.
why don't we open up to
Last night I
Genesis
went, oh, if you go first, nobody.
6 through 9. We often turn the ark. In fact, a few years back, I took a course from MLC called Creation Apologetics, and then I took a second round of it, which was a different course that was supposed to build on it, and it was good enough. I could have probably gone deeper into some of the things, but for what it was good. And one of the things he observes is, what would most people picture if they picture Noah's Ark? What would they have in mind?
Big boat.
A big boat. Let me get that.
But an ugly boat.
You picture an ugly boat. I bet that's not what most people think.
we were in it.
Yeah, we were in it. Have you seen it?
No, when we were down there for the Creation Museum, that was just under
Yeah,
construction, and the ark wasn't even
Yeah.
bought yet.
Yeah,
It's
our church,
it's cool.
our church took a field trip, went with the bus down.
It's incredible.
Never mind, I don't know what I did with it.
People probably have the nursery school picture of Noah's Ark, but the animals have their heads out.
The animals have their heads sticking out. The giraffe is as tall as the boat itself. You have the cute little elephants with their trunks sticking out. The dove is flying up above. Noah's got a big old smile on his face as he opens those doors and come on in. They have a cute little story, don't they, in mind? Cute little animals. In fact, I know for a fact we had a Noah's Ark toy. We had little Playmobil animals that you could put in the ark. A little happy Noah to offer his sacrifice. I think there was an altar even for it, a little place for him to offer his sacrifice after the flood was over. But that's what we almost always picture. Or that's what most people probably picture. What's the problem with that?
That kind of boat was, most people pictures, designed for propulsion, move from one space to another.
Okay?
And Noah's Ark had no
barge.
need to be propelled. It could just be a box.
Right, it just had to float. Okay? What else is the problem with the pictures?
Well, it talks about opening the window and implies not really being able to see what's going on outside.
Right,
Since you're letting a bird out to see if it comes back.
he can't look for dry land. He has to send out a dove. And certainly has no way to steer towards dry land. So in some ways you're like, well, what was the point of even doing that? But it's not like you could say, oh, it's right over there. We should go over there. What else is the problem with picturing a cute little boat? It's often too small. And then when critics of the Bible want to disbelieve the event, don't we serve it up to them on a little platter? Who could possibly believe that the lions and the tigers and the bears, oh my, are in this tiny little boat with these human beings and with the giraffes and the zebras and all the other things, and whatever criticisms people want to raise, and if you have the cute little boat, those seem to make sense. And you said you were just at the Ark Encounter, Barry? What do you think?
Well, it's incredible.
Okay.
It's absolutely incredible.
What-
Because they try to, you know, they try to see if they can figure out how, you know, they moved manure, kept things, you know.
How the animals were
sim-
fed.
Yeah.
How they use gravity to try to do, a lot of the like manual labor
And
and
the airflow
cleaning
in
and,
it.
yeah.
And so it was interesting, and who knows, about those things. But it was interesting the way they, it could have been done this way.
Not that we would say it had to be done this way.
Yeah.
Okay. And then,
It would have been pitch black unless you were right by one of the windows, which may or may not have had glass.
right,
So the entire thing is pitch black, basically. Unless you have a lot of flame or whatever.
okay. Do you also get a sense of the absolute massive size?
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah. When you walk around the corner and see it, it's amazing.
I think I remember reading a story 10 or 15 years ago, and I don't know how old the story was when I read it, about a guy in Europe who built a quarter-sized ark just to prove that you could build a boat using material, something that would float, using materials similar to what the Bible describes, using the tools that we assume would have been possibly available to someone at that time, and just seeing that, hey, look, you can build something like this and float. What advantage did Noah have?
He had time, and he had a lot of expertise around him, people that probably helped him.
Perhaps. We're not told how much help he had, other than I guess we assume his son. But you can do a lot in 200 years, can't you?
I always thought to think about the ridicule he thought.
You know, the Bible doesn't mention that. We assume it. And I'm not saying that you're wrong. But the Bible never mentions Noah being ridiculed.
There's Noah, he's still building his
Still building that,
Building that huge, ridiculous, it's so big.
building that huge box. How many feet you add today, Noah?
And you'd have to assume it's, all the other people around him, they were, well in, old too, but they're living as long as Noah was.
So, I bring all of that up because I think it's worth just remembering what's the whole point of Noah's Ark. Or maybe I should ask it this way. Where are we told the whole point of Noah's Ark?
I think there's a reference to baptism, I can't remember where.
1 Peter 3, where Peter says that the waters of the flood symbolize baptism, which now saves you. While in the flood, 8 people were saved, now in baptism, we have been saved through the waters of baptism. So the waters of the flood are not as just about God's wrath against sin. In fact, it's more that God despairs that soon there's going to be nothing left. And so God has to save the 8 to preserve his promise of salvation. So 8 are saved through the flood is the emphasis that the Bible has. It's not on the however many perished in the flood. Now, at the same time, we can't deny that that's true also. Whenever people go the opposite route and they want to sneer in cynicism at the flood, saying, oh, you have this cute little story, and think about all the people dying. It's often the same people who would say, why doesn't God stop all the evil in the world? And yet they want to complain when he does. And really what they're saying is, well, we want God to stop the evil, but not like that. And the same is true of our own hearts, isn't it? That we want God to stop evil, we think, but we really don't want God to stop us from doing what we want to do. We certainly don't want him to forcefully stop us from doing what we want. So, you have God seeing that man's hearts are only wicked all the time, except Noah was a righteous man, a man of integrity in his generation. I like the more literal translation. He's blameless within his own generation. So no one can point to anything that Noah does that would be against God's will. Noah walked with God. And God tells him to build the ark, and that he would bring to a pair of every living creature, although 7 of every clean creature. And how long does it rain?
40 days and 40 nights.
Rains 40 days and 40 nights. This is the first time, I think, and I'm almost positive. I didn't know what you were going to bring up, so I didn't do any research. I'm almost positive this is the first 40 in all of Scripture. But it's worth thinking about, what does 40 mean? And I think we can start right at the flood. Why does God choose to repeat the number 40? Because God does. So God doesn't say, the number 40 is special, here's what 40 means. But when God repeatedly uses 40 for certain events, we can have an idea of what God is trying to show us. And then in Revelation, we get that applied to our own lives too. Why 40? What does 40 mean? Or how about this? What are the other 40s?
Jesus was tempted 40 days.
Jesus is tempted 40 days. What's the other most famous 40?
Moses, 40 years. 40 years in Pharaoh's court, and 40 years in tending sheep, and then 40 years leading the children.
Okay, so Moses gets 43 times, but usually we think about the Israelites wandering in the desert 40 years. There's perhaps one more famous 40, but it's doubled. 80 years in exile. Each of those is a time when God's people are under extreme stress and pressure. And when the only thing they can do is rely on God to keep them. And so that comes back in Revelation, with number 40 is repeated, for us to think about our time here on earth as our time wandering in the wilderness, or our time while the rains come down and the waters rise, and we wait for the Lord's salvation. Then Noah's in the ark for about a year. The waters recede. He sends out the raven. The raven doesn't come back. He sends out the dove. The dove comes back immediately. He sends out the dove again. The dove comes back with the olive branch. He sends out the dove again, and the dove does not come back. The ark comes to a rest, and finally the Lord says, "Get out of the ark." Noah opens the door. So Linda, since it's your favorite story, do you have anything to add? Okay. It's very vivid. And it's, and I think little kids naturally get the main point. Like, so when I said people mock, like, oh, you think of the cute ark with the people and the animals in it, but think about all the people dying. What do kids think about when they think about the flood? They think about the ark and the people and the animals that God saved. So the kids get the point. It's us adults who miss it. Other thoughts on the flood?
How much of the earth do you think was? It wouldn't have been the whole thing.
Well, depends on what theory you want to go by. So, part of me still wonders, have you ever seen the Earth as a jigsaw puzzle? Where you can fit pretty much every continent together into one giant landmass. I tend to think that that's possible, and that the time of the flood and the time after, as those waters recede, that's when those plates, because it says we have waters from the deep rising up, so it's not just that it rains enough to have that much water, but the waters from the deep, so all the earth emptied its waters. And so you imagine that water coming up and breaking things apart in those lines that it would form, and how long it might take for that then to settle again. So I think it's very possible the whole earth is full. I also think it's possible mountains were not as tall as they are, so we don't have to imagine that Mount Everest is covered in water, because I don't think we have to imagine that Mount Everest was as tall, that Mount Everest even existed at that time. We don't know, we aren't given a map and the topography of the earth before. But if people are living and reproducing for, I'll give it 2,000 to 6,000 years, and they're living 600 years at a time, I think we can assume they're very possible.
And they were all speaking the same language.
Probably. Or at least different versions of it. Whether or not they had Spanish and Portuguese, I don't know. Or things like that, where the language is almost exactly the same, but the separation adjusts it.
Region.
Whether they said biscuit or cookie.
Makes you wonder questions
I don't know that
like that.
we're worried about that one.
Immediately answered, or, you know,
I
I
don't
say
know.
sometime, hey!
Yeah. Is Noah going to be busy answering everybody's questions about the pre-flood world?
He's got a lot
Hey,
of time.
Enoch, come over here. I have some questions for you.
I was reading something about the fountains of the Great Deep, and some recent research, and this goes back maybe 10 years, they've discovered that there are these fountains below the ocean, below the bottom of the ocean, caverns full of fresh water. How they determine this, I don't know, drilling down. So there is evidence that there's these fountains were down there, the source of water. You probably heard this too.
I'm always skeptical when people point to some sort of study or discovery and say, see, this shows this. Not that I don't also, like I said with the continental drift, I don't say that it's a fact, and if people were to, if someone were to prove that to be wrong, I would not be like, oh, now I can't believe in the flood again. But it's interesting. We have footprints that, if you trust the dating system, we have footprints in America that predate the flood. So, is it that there was less water, but the oceans were less full, and so people were just able to walk. Or is there other? Also, you find human footprints underneath dinosaur footprints in the lake in New Mexico. Just a little fact there. Isn't that odd? So, you know, I don't know about the fountains of the deep and how much stock you want to put in that. The one thing I do think, it seems to me more likely, and St. Helens proved this, or St. Helens demonstrated this, that a canyon like the Grand Canyon, with its shape and its deep chasm that it created, is far more likely from one mass amount of water draining out than what people want to believe, that the Colorado River just every year took a little bit more soot out to where it was going and dug that canyon over millions of years. So, and up by St. Helens after the eruption and some of the floods that followed that, there were similar canyons made very quickly within that 1 year. Maybe catastrophe is a better explanation for these things than millions of them. I have no problem with that, because you're never going to prove it one way or the other. But it also goes by our common sense. If you've been playing at the beach, what happens if you pour a ton of water in your moat? The moat washes out and you get it clean. So, any other thoughts on the flood? All right, who's next? I'm going to move faster so the more you have to share. Second Kings 6. I don't even know what's in Second. I'm in Second Kings with my own devotions right now, and I can't. Okay. I think it's worth reading this one, just because now that you have it. Now the king of Aram was waging war against Israel. He would make plans with his officials, saying, "My camp will be at such and such a place." But the man of God sent a message to the king of Israel, saying, "Be careful, because when you pass this place, because the Arameans are going to be down there." So the king of Israel would send scouts to the place that the man of God had pointed out. So the man of God warned him, and he was kept safe, and not just once or twice. The king of Aram was enraged because of this. He summoned his officials and he said, "Won't you tell me who of us is with the king of Israel?" One of his officials said, "No, my lord king. It is Elisha, the prophet in Israel, who tells the king of Israel the words which you speak in your bedroom." Then he said, "Go and see where he is. I will send men to capture him." He was told Dothan is where he is. So he sent horses and chariots and a strong force there. They came at night and surrounded the city. When the man of God's servant got up early and went out, there were soldiers, horses, and chariots surrounding the city. So the attendant said to Elisha, "Oh no, my lord, what shall we do?" He answered, "Do not be afraid, for those who are with us are more than those who are with them." Then Elisha prayed and said, "O Lord, open his eyes so that he can see." Then the Lord opened the servant's eyes, and he saw the hills were full of horses and chariots of fire all around Elisha. When the Arameans came down, Elisha prayed to the Lord, "Strike these people with blindness." So he struck them with blindness, just as Elisha had asked. Then Elisha said to them, This is not the road, and this is not the city. Follow me, and I will take you to the man you are looking for. So he brought them to Samaria. When they came to Samaria, Elisha prayed, "O Lord, open their eyes so that they can see." Then the Lord opened their eyes, and he saw that they were right in the middle of Samaria. When the king of Israel saw them, he said to Elisha, "Shall I strike them down, my father? Shall I strike them down?" He said, "Do not strike them down. Would you strike down a man you captured with your own sword and bow? Set food and water before them so they can eat and drink and go back to their master." So he gave a great feast for them. They ate and they drank. Then he sent them on their way, and they went to their master. The Arabian raiding parties did not come into the land of Israel. So Sheila, what's
It's being surrounded by the angels.
those who are for us are more than those who are against us. It's also another one of those vivid stories. You can just about picture the people, one hand on the shoulder of his guy marching down the road. Hey, it's just a little further. Just a little further, march this way, and they march him right through the gates of Samaria, and all of Samaria's soldiers are surrounding them, and they're going, now what do we do? Throw a feast. Other thoughts? On that one. That when I read about Elijah and Elisha, it makes you wonder, were miracles like this common? Or are they recorded because they were uncommon? I tend to think they were uncommon, because why else would you record that an axe had floated? That seems unremarkable. Who cares if it was a borrowed axe? You're buying an axe. And Elisha decides to make that's right above. So, other questions or thoughts on Elisha and the king and the Arameans? It is such a comforting thought that God's angels are always where He wants them to be. There's so many. The hosts of heaven.
Imagine how many there are now.
The same number there were then.
Think so?
Yeah, there's not more angels being created.
There's more people.
Right. There's another host that's entering into heaven, but we're not here. Who else wants to share their favorite story? Their favorite event, or your favorite person? I did give you that option. And don't give up hope, because the Lord knows those who are His. And I don't know, would we find it comforting or distressing if we learned that there were only 7,000 believers in Oregon?
I know there's that many.
So you would all be happy to hear that. I think there's far more than 7,000 believers. There's probably more than that. So it reminds me of another event where the Canaanite woman comes to Jesus and she's begging him to heal her daughter. And Jesus says it's not right to take the children's bread and give it to the dogs. And he says, yeah, but even the dogs get a crumb from their master's table. He say, just a crumb is enough. How much power is there in just the whisper of God? That Elijah is not afraid when there's the earthquake and the wind and the fire and the mountain is shaking. But when God whispers, he falls on his face and says, woe is me. How dare I? What was I thinking when I opened my mouth against the Lord? And he sounds even more pitiful when he whines. He did.
I just, that stood out to me.
Oh, the woman? Oh, sorry. Katie said her favorite story is the Canaanite woman. Because we have dogs and we know they can't live off the crumbs that fall for our table, even if they try. And so you think about what Jesus means by that, or what the woman is saying by that. It's true, they didn't have kibble bags. Other favorites?
The plagues on Egypt and
Okay.
the whole story of how they got out of there.
The story of God's deliverance and how he overwhelms Pharaoh again and again. I think it's credible that each plague targets a different god of Egypt to just demonstrate that all of Egypt's gods are powerless against the Lord. Once again, I didn't research specifically, but the ninth plague is the sun. So Ra is the sun god, but they worshiped the Nile. They had all these different gods that were connected with these different things. Before I would say this with absolute certainty, I would want to find the primary sources that showed each of the gods, because people make things up because they sound good. But, right. Okay. And then, even in Egyptian mythology, Anubis is the god of the dead. He's the one who kills and makes alive. And yet it's the Lord who passes through and takes the life, and he passes over the people that he wants to spare. Others? I can't read all 10 plagues. I'd lose my voice. Barry, you look like you got one.
Well, my all-time favorite is creation. Fascinating. Use that as class.
What's your favorite aspect of the creation account? I'll share mine after you share yours. Okay. Anybody else have a favorite part about the creation account that they would like to share?
The further that tells us, and the more universe is shown, you get the feeling of that.
Okay. Others?
The garden might be a great place.
Yeah, a garden designed by the Lord could be a place where you could work all day and be happy. There were no weeds. But there was work for you to do. You got to improve it. God created a perfect garden and he put man there to improve it. It's an impressive thing. My favorite part is God well, I always say it takes me a long time in catechism class to teach the creation story. I think it takes me like 4 lessons. It's one lesson in the book, but it takes me 4 lessons. I can't get through it. But I always say the first verse, when it says, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth, I always kind of point the student to, that's like saying, before even time began, God creates all stuff. So, because then we have the Spirit floating over the waters that are formless. The Spirit hovers over the earth and it is formless and void. There's nothing there, but the stuff is there. And so it's like in a moment, if you're a sci-fi Doctor Who fan, time and space begin at that moment in the beginning. So before the beginning, there's nothing but God. After the beginning, all the stuff that we experience begin. But I like that God creates light on the first day. And there's evening, and so then he also creates evening for the first night. And morning again for the first day. When does the sun get created?
So I'm kind of teaching the first year confirmation professor, just kind of the history and stuff. And that was one of the things I pointed out to her is, there's light, there's no sun. What does that mean?
Yeah, so who provides light? God provides light. By the way, we still don't understand light, do we? Is it a particle? Is it a wave? Is it energy? Yes is the answer to all of those. And then, what is the purpose of the sun? By the way, vegetation is created before the sun, moon, and stars. So the light that God gives to the earth is sufficient for the plants to grow before the sun is there. What is the purpose of the sun? Mark time so that I can go, sun's been up for about an hour and a half. About an hour. So that you can mark, when the sun's up there, you can say, oh, it's about noon. When the sun's over there, you can say, oh, it's about 6. The sun is there for us to keep time. What's the moon for? To give light to the night, yes. What else? Okay, it might cause tides. You can kind of keep time on that too. What's the moon do every month? You just said it.
Full moon.
It waxes and wanes. For most people, for most of history, that's how they mark their day, their year. And then they'd have to adjust every once in a while because a year is not a perfect lunar month. But from full moon to full moon or from new moon to new moon, that was a month. And that's how they measured their time. The stars in the sky are the most intricate clock ever created, and it never fails. And I won't emphasize too much my disappointment that I've come to the conclusion that aliens don't exist. But if someone wants to say, well, you can't look up at the stars and think that we're the only sentient beings in the universe, I can answer, yes, I can, because what were the stars created for? Or for whom were the stars created? For us. God tells us that. Now, does that prevent God from creating other sentient beings elsewhere in the universe? I suppose not. But
I've often thought there could be animals or bacteria or whatever like out there just because of
Yeah.
God or Adam's father
well, so C.S. Lewis postulated that God could have created another sentient race elsewhere, and he would basically say to us, "What's that to you and me?" But he was also kind of convinced they would never find their way here because either they might be more evil because they don't have Christ, and then, well, maybe we would need to evangelize them, or they would be innocent and God would make sure that we had nothing to do with them if they were still in their innocence. He would not want us to destroy their innocence and take it down. Anyway, other stories, other events or people.
I always found it interesting. Never
Mm-hmm.
this guy that is an unbeliever.
Mm-hmm.
And it's slapped in the face with all this stuff, miracles, like, and he's still arrogant and doesn't want to do it until finally God had enough with him and lived like an animal for 7 years. And it took that 7 years for him to brought him to believing. You know, I find it interesting with that and Job's story and Jacob's story. They were believers. God allowed all this stuff to happen to bring him down and restored him. Nebuchadnezzar was, you know, he was rich, but he was none.
I don't know that Nebuchadnezzar ever had saving faith, but he did humble himself eventually. So, we would think after the fiery furnace, he would have been like, oh, that's enough to prove to me. Or after Daniel interprets his dreams for him, that should be enough for him. And indeed, he does issue a decree that for a time people are to worship the God of Israel. But why is that not as impressive in Babylon as we might want to believe? Did the Babylonians have any trouble believing that the God of Israel would be real? They believed lots of gods were real. And so, if the God of Israel, what may have surprised them was that the God of Israel was able to do things in Babylon. Because in general, you kind of believe, well, Israel's God's in Israel. And by the way, we defeated Israel, so what's that mean about Nebuchadnezzar? He's more powerful than Israel's God. So the fact that Israel's God can come and do things in Babylon, that humbled them a little bit. But, well, then we worship him for a month or two. And that should keep him happy, because that keeps all our other gods happy. And so then we go back to worshiping all these other gods. And then, Nebuchadnezzar believed his own propaganda. I'm the most glorious king. I'm a god unto myself. And God warns him, and but he's looking out at his balcony, and what? Maybe he can see his gardens. One of the wonders of the ancient world right there. Nobody has ever been as wonderful as I. Nebuchadnezzar, and God says, okay. Go act like a cow for a while. And then he humbles himself. And I think he does humble himself. And I don't know that we could say he's got faith in God.
I praise exalt and honor.
Right? Mm-hmm.
But those were his last words.
I mean, maybe I'm wrong.
I mean, yeah,
It's just, for them, those are easier words to say than we think.
Gotta appease to God. And so this guy's obviously more powerful than I thought he was, so I should give him some respect and then maybe he'll leave me alone. I don't know.
But then again, he's with Daniel, so maybe Daniel shared their hope of a Messiah that would come and deliver God's people and bless the whole world, and Nebuchadnezzar heard enough that after he was humbled, he came to true repentance. But I don't get enough from his words to be convinced that he's God's saving faith. But it is amazing that that's what it took. Go act like a cow for a second.
Yeah, to me, I just see, well, what's the point of the story if he isn't a believer? I mean,
Well, so we know Darius is not a believer after Daniel and the lion's den. He says something similar. And we know that Nebuchadnezzar, after he says something similar after the men in the fiery furnace, that he then returns to, this event happens after. The point is, God is above all gods and God is above all kings. And remember, Daniel writes these not for the Babylonians, but for the people of Israel, to remind them who their God is and to remind us who our God is, so that we do not put our trust in princes in mortal men. I think that's as much a point to that event as anything.
I also was looking for one of the other things, is where when God opened up the earth, swallowed that whole
That would be in Numbers. Well, I don't know what chapter, but where there's the rebellion against Moses and
Right.
the earth and Moses says, whoever's on their side, go over with them. Whoever's on the Lord's side, come over with me. The earth.
event.
And quite the picture.
Quite the picture.
I always like grown attached to those events where God smacks the truth right, rubs the truth right in the face of those who refuse to believe, even when they continue to not believe. So I've always liked Elijah and the prophets of Baal. And Ahab and Jezebel see all this, and it doesn't make them believe. Instead, it makes them want to kill Elijah. But I also like, in the New Testament, Peter and John are thrown into prison and ordered not to preach. And the angel comes and opens the gate for them and tells them, go preach in the temple courts. And they close the door on their way out. And then the chief priest tells the guards, oh, go fetch Peter and John so we can bring them in front of them. And they open the gates and they're peeking under the mattresses, shuffling through the straw, checking the bars on the windows. And someone comes running into the prison and says, are you looking for Peter and John? Oh, they're in the temple preaching. And then they, oh yeah, we were told to go here. And then they go in front of the chief priests and they preach the good news again, and they still don't believe. Just
One
those.
of the sad ones is
Well, I
Steve.
mean,
He had that great speech, and they were like, we're not having any of this anymore.
well, if you read Stephen's speech, I mean, he's not very nice.
Oh, no. That's what I'm saying, they had enough of it, we just got done killing Jesus. This guy's doing the same thing to us, we're just
Yeah,
gonna stone him.
He's not very nice. But I think that is just a reminder for us. We have nothing to prove when it comes to the gospel. Now we can present the facts of the gospel, because there are facts in the gospel. And we should be clear on that you need to know, you need to have an answer for the empty tomb. You need to have an answer for who Jesus is. Can he be a good teacher and claim to be the Son of God? You have to have an answer to that. You can't just pick and choose, well, we like some of his teachings, but we don't like that he claimed to be God's Son and the Savior of the world. Really, you can't have both. However, our proof does not change people's hearts. No one had more proof than the chief priests. So our job is not to prove the gospel. Our job is to proclaim. So, with that, thank you, and next week we'll start our study on the Lord's Supper.